All right, the next thing we're going to talk about here is trench warfare. And trench warfare really typifies the fighting on the Western Front. If you ever see a question that asks, where were trenches most common in World War One? It's in the West, on the western border of Germany. And I want to clarify this. So Germany is this country kind of in the middle of Europe. To its west is France, and to its east is Russia. So when we talk about the Western Front, we're talking about Germany's western border. And when we're talking about the Eastern Front, we're talking about Germany's eastern border with Russia. So now we're going to look at the Western Front. And we learned that a series of trenches were built along this border between Germany and France that goes 1,000+ miles. It's not just one trench. There's multiple lines of trenches. And this is what a trench would look like. These are 10 feet deep. These are wide. You could peek out in Germany over here. There'd probably be a bunch of barbed wire. In Germany, you have their own trench 100 miles across, pointing the wrong way, 100 miles across the battlefield with their own set of barbed wire and their own 10 feet deep. And you can see the wooden the structures here built to keep these trenches alive. You can see this guy's, he's catching a nap because they lived in these trenches for months at a time. Things like trench toe and these horrible, horrible circumstances. These were one of the most miserable, horrible styles of fighting known to man ever in the history of warfare. Okay, and this was how the Western War was fought for 4 straight years. Here's another picture. These guys, they're probably on the attack. This is a smaller trench, okay, versus the bigger one that we saw. Maybe this was early in the war, and as the war got dragged on, these trenches got more and more intricate. I used to draw this wonderful picture. It wasn't really wonderful. I'm a terrible artist. But back when I actually taught in person versus this, and one day, can't wait. Okay, so anyways, I'm sorry. Dreaming of the day that we get back to school. These trench, so here's what would happen. Every once in a while, one side would call for an attack, and thousands of men, tens of thousands of men would get out of their trench and run across the middle of the trenches, okay? They called this no man's land, into machine gun fire. Remember, the machine gun was there. These were machine guns kind of on a stand, right? And the guy would stand behind it, kind of, and just, I mean, the casualty rates were insane. At one battle in Verdun, 700,000 men died in one battle over a series of weeks or months. Over a mile of land, over 2 miles of land. I mean, it just horrific. And some of the craziest things would happen is that after these storms, they would call for a pause. They would pause. Can we pick up the dead? And they would allow then the medics to run on the field, pick up the dead bodies, and bring them back to their side, where they would then do what they had to do, in part because both sides knew that these dead bodies in the middle of the field would cause disease. So the other side would have a mutual interest as to like cleaning up the dead bodies. It's horrible, right? And eventually this becomes what they call a war of attrition. Like, who's going to give up first? Okay, we're both suffering greatly. Who's going to give up first? The Industrial Revolution does have a major effect on this. Inventions like the car, railroad, planes, machine guns change warfare forever. The more weapons can be made, the quicker they can be made, the more people can be killed, the more people can fight. And I'm going to pause for a second. I'm going to pause. And I want to talk about the plane in war. Let's talk about the first plane in war. So here's our factories, and they could produce weapons at a much greater rate than the blacksmith could, the village blacksmith who made them one at a time. So we're going to see the first planes used in war. And I don't know about you, but I was watching the Super Bowl this weekend. I was hoping it would be closer, but, props to Brady. He's incredible. He's the quarterback. Okay, and at first, so planes are now barely invented. They're these kind of planes, right? Biplanes, planes with these little propellers that made them fly, and they were used to spy on enemy positions. So all of a sudden, you see this plane. You've never seen planes before. It's flying overhead, and it's got a guy. He's drawing a map of what he sees. You would turn around and go back and give the map, and the generals would use that map to come up with a battle scheme, right? So they also did the same thing with Zeppelins, these big blimps, right? The Germans called them Zeppelins, or we called them blimps, like the Goodyear blimp you see floating on the Rose Bowl used to play back when we had live sports and all that stuff. Okay, I got to stop dreaming about the past and the future. By the way, just for fun, Led Zeppelin, greatest rock group ever? I don't know, maybe, depending on your opinion. Led Zeppelin, the sinking of a Zeppelin. Yeah, these Zeppelins were really ineffective in war because there's like helium in here. These are all helium, which allows for it to float, right? And one shot, one spark, boom, it goes up. The whole thing goes down from one spark. So they turn out to be really terrible weapons of war. Although at first they were very scary to the first soldiers. So at first they're one guy, he's drawing maps in his plane, right? And then later they add a second seat to these biplanes, which turn out to be the weapons of World War One. And the guy in the second seat has a handgun. Okay, he's shooting his pistol at the other plane, who now comes up because we got a plane up there. Let's go knock him down. We don't want him to learn our positions. So they send up another plane, and now they're doing plane-to-plane combat, which, by the way, is called dogfighting. It's still, I don't know when the last time there's been that kind of war with planes or dogfighting. But theoretically, if there was a war, that would happen. If there was a big war between two great countries who wanted to go all in on it, it would be a lot of planes in midair fighting, dogfighting. Okay. Anyways, eventually they mount a machine gun now. So the back guy becomes a gunner, and the front guy's piloting, and they're trying to position themselves so that they can shoot each other with these machine guns. Eventually, they start to throw grenade over the side of the plane, land on the enemy position and explode. And we know today that planes are a huge part of the U.S. war machine. We when we go to war with countries, we largely bomb them from the air for a prolonged period of time until they're too weak, and then our ground forces move in. And no other country can compete with our Air Force. I know that China is building one quickly. Russia, of course, has a very strong Air Force. We haven't gone to war with them. When we go to war with weaker countries, Iraq, Afghanistan, they don't have an Air Force. We just fly over the skies, and they have their little anti-aircraft fire trying to shoot our planes. Probably not going to happen. A lot of our planes are flying at 10,000 feet. It's not. You're not going to get them with a gun. But anyways, this is the beginning of planes being used in war. And also we took a deeper look at trenches.